Don't worry, class. No one's ever solved this. It's just for fun. Laughter rippled through the classroom, not because anyone understood the joke, but because the substitute teacher said it with such dry amusement. Mr. Holbrook, bald, spectacled, and vaguely impatient, had scrawled a long, looping equation across the chalkboard. The symbols tangled into one another like a barbed fence. Most of the students in that small Texas farming town had no idea what they were looking at. They just saw endless letters, signs, and an equal mark stretched out like a cattle brand. It was Amarillo, after all. Algebra was already more than most kids wanted to stomach. A mystery equation from Europe, written over 100 years ago, was about as useful as snow in August. Ethan Cole did not laugh. He sat in the third row, sleeves rolled up on a flannel shirt that smelled faintly of dust and hay. The boy was wiry, 14, with the quiet air of someone used to listening more than speaking. His boots were scuffed from fixing fences before dawn. His knuckles were raw from carrying buckets of feed. But his eyes, they did not belong to a tired farm boy. They tracked the chalk lines on the board with an intensity that unsettled even Holbrook, though the man could not have explained why. "This is called the Riemann zeta function," Holbrook said, tapping the board with the chalk. "The Germans dreamed it up. Smart people have chased it for centuries. The heart of the puzzle is called the Riemann hypothesis, and I promise you it is far beyond anything you will ever need to know. Consider it an exotic curiosity." The class chuckled again. Someone muttered, "Looks like chicken scratch." Another whispered, "Bet even NASA can't figure it out." Holbrook waved them quiet and continued, his tone drifting between boredom and fascination. "The idea, put simply, is that the prime numbers, those indivisible seeds of mathematics, 2, 3, 5, 7, and so on, are scattered through the number line. They look random, they feel random, but maybe, just maybe, they follow a secret rhythm. This equation here, if it is true, could tell us how the building blocks of arithmetic are arranged forever." Most eyes glazed over. A girl at the back tapped her pencil like a drum beat. A boy doodled a tractor in his notebook. But Ethan stayed still. He could almost hear the numbers breathing behind the chalk lines. To him, it did not look like a fortress of symbols. It looked like a river. The fractions stacked endlessly, 1 over 1, 1 over 2, 1 over 3, flowing downward into infinity. He imagined cattle driven down a dusty trail, each step smaller than the last, yet all part of the same herd. He saw the way the current narrowed, then curved, hinting at a pattern underneath the chaos. He did not know what it meant. He had no grand theory, but he saw a crack of light where others saw only a wall. The bell rang. Desks scraped. The laughter scattered into the hallway with the smell of cafeteria corn dogs. Holbrook rubbed his temple and muttered, "Back to fractions tomorrow. Something more humane." He set down the chalk, gathering his papers. Ethan lingered. He bent over his notebook, the cover worn and dirt-stained. On the page he sketched what he saw. Not the heavy symbols, but curves like the ripple of wind through wheat, arcs bending toward one another, then pulling apart. Beneath it he wrote in awkward block letters, "Maybe the pattern is not numbers lined up, but threads weaving through." He stared at it for a moment. His chest felt warm, as though he had heard a faint song only he could hear. Then he folded the paper neatly, once, twice, into a square. When the room was empty, he walked to the teacher's desk. Holbrook was erasing the board. White dust clung to his fingers, floating in the air. He did not notice the boy approach. Ethan placed the folded paper on the corner of the desk, said nothing, and slipped out the door. Outside, the sky stretched wide and colorless, the way only the Texas panhandle could be. Wind tugged at his shirt. His father would be waiting with the truck, an old Chevy with one headlight dimmer than the other. Tonight there would be fence posts to reset, calves to check, and a supper of beans and cornbread. Ethan's world was soil and sweat, rusted metal and early mornings. But for one quiet moment in that dusty classroom, he had seen something vast, something eternal, shimmering beneath chalk and laughter, and he left it behind on a folded piece of paper. Mr. Halbrook almost missed it. The last of the students had gone, the hallway echoing with shouts and footsteps. He stacked the attendance sheet, slid textbooks into his worn leather bag, and reached for the eraser one last time. That was when he saw the square of paper resting against the edge of his desk. Curiosity tugged. He unfolded it with a distracted hand. His eyes narrowed. On the page was not a joke or a doodle, but a sketch. Strange and fluid. The lines suggested a spiral, narrowing, bending inward, then breaking outward again. Beneath it, the words in uneven handwriting, threads weaving through. Halbrook's breath caught. It was crude, almost childlike, but the idea underneath was not. In 20 years of teaching, he had never seen a farm kid draw anything remotely like it. And in 20 years of glancing at the Riemann hypothesis from afar, he had never once considered the possibility the boy had hinted at, that the puzzle was not about rigid steps of arithmetic, but about threads, flows, something alive. The substitute teacher sat back, paper trembling slightly in his hands. He had intended today's lesson as a throwaway, a curiosity, nothing more. But this note was no curiosity. It was a question he did not know how to answer. Out the window, Ethan climbed into the passenger seat of the battered Chevy, the sunset outlining his small figure against the cab. His father started the engine, and the truck rumbled away in a plume of dust. Halbrook stared after him, the folded note still warm from the boy's touch. Something had shifted in the room. Something had begun. That night, Ethan slept lightly, as he always did, waking when the coyotes called across the fields. He did not know that a piece of paper, left behind without a word, would travel far beyond Amarillo. He did not know that his quiet sketch would stir minds thousands of miles away, in offices lined with books and windows overlooking the Charles River. For now, he was only a boy on a farm, dreaming of fences and rain. But the equation no one could touch had touched him, and soon the world would notice. The rain came thin and slanted across Amarillo that night, more dust than water. Mr. Halbrook sat hunched at the kitchen table of his rented house, a single lamp burning over his shoulder. The folded square of paper lay between his hands. He had read it a dozen times already, but each time the same unease returned. He was a practical man, a teacher who had seen more excuses than insights from students. Farm boys brought notes scrawled in mud, girls slipped him poems in the margins of homework, but this was different. This little sketch, these 4 words, threads weaving through, struck like a stone against glass. Halbrook pulled down an old volume from his shelf, a book he had kept since graduate school. The pages smelled of mildew and long summers. He flipped until he found the chapter, The Riemann Hypothesis. The same familiar wall of symbols stared back. For decades, mathematicians had searched for proof that all the special numbers, the zeros of the zeta function, lined up along one single vertical line on the complex plane. To the untrained ear, that meant nothing. To Halbrook, it was the heartbeat of modern mathematics. If true, it would explain the secret order of prime numbers, the indivisible seeds from which every calculation grows. If false, it would unravel whole branches of theory. And here, in his hand, was a boy's note suggesting that primes did not stand alone like fence posts, but bent and wove like strands in a rope. Not a proof, not even close, but a way of seeing no textbook had ever offered. He rubbed his eyes, laughed at himself. Ridiculous, he whispered. It's a child's doodle. Nothing more. Yet the unease remained. By morning, he gave in. He snapped a photo with his aging phone and sent it, almost without thinking, to an old colleague back east. The message was brief. Found this in class. Doesn't it strike you as strange? H. The colleague, a lecturer now at Harvard, replied within the hour. Strange indeed. Did you say this came from a student? Halbrook did not answer right away. He looked again at the note. Yes, from a student. A farm boy with boots too big, a face too thin, a silence too heavy for his age. He typed back. From a 14-year-old, out here in Amarillo, said nothing, just left it. There was no reply for several hours. Then, late that night, a name appeared on his screen. Dr. Malcolm Kerr. The message was formal, almost clipped. Mr. Halbrook, my colleague forwarded me your student's sketch. I do not exaggerate when I say it startled me. It resembles certain exploratory diagrams I have seen in current research, though from a far older hand than a 14-year-old. I would like to know more about the boy. Could you tell me his name? Halbrook read the message twice, then a third time. His throat tightened. He typed back slowly. Ethan Cole. Father runs cattle just outside town. Quiet boy. There was a pause, then another ping. I will be in Texas in 3 days. On the Cole farm that same evening, Ethan was tightening the wires of a sagging fence. His father, John Cole, stood beside him, boots sinking into the damp earth. The older man had the look of weathered leather, tough, creased, but not unkind. You're somewhere else tonight, son, John said, bracing the post while Ethan twisted the wire. Head in the clouds again? Ethan gave a half smile. Just thinking about class. Math again? The boy nodded. John grunted. Never trusted numbers much. Cows don't care how you count them. They just want hay. Ethan tightened the wire until it sang. Maybe numbers care about us, though. The father looked at him, puzzled but soft-eyed. He did not understand the words, but he recognized the weight behind them. His boy was not like other farm kids. He spoke less, dreamed more. They worked in silence until the fence held firm. The wind rattled through the grass, carrying with it the faint scent of rain. Back in his study, Dr. Malcolm Kerr read and reread the forwarded sketch. He was a man of Cambridge, precise, well-dressed, with little patience for fanciful claims. But the sketch on his screen unsettled him. For years he had stared at endless graphs of the zeta function, points and lines plotted on cold screens. But this boy's drawing, rough as it was, had hinted at something his colleagues never dared. That primes were not scattered like accidents, but braided, as though pulled by invisible hands. Threads weaving through, he whispered to himself. The words sounded less like mathematics, more like prophecy. He closed his laptop, but the image lingered in his mind. By morning, his decision was set. He booked a flight. In Amarillo, the school day began as any other. Students shuffled through hallways, backpacks bumping, lockers slamming. Ethan walked quietly to his desk, dust still clinging to his boots. Halbrook watched him with a mixture of pride and dread. He knew a storm was coming, though the boy remained unaware. By noon, a letter had already been drafted on Harvard stationery, stamped and signed, waiting for a messenger. And Ethan, between bites of cornbread from the cafeteria tray, thought only of how the chalk lines had felt alive beneath his gaze, like cattle shifting restlessly before a drive. He did not know that across the country, men in dark suits and polished shoes were whispering his name. He did not know that the sketch he had left behind, the note that should not exist, was already racing ahead of him, toward a world far larger and colder than Amarillo. For now, he was still only a boy mending fences, but in 3 days, the man from Cambridge would arrive, and nothing would be the same. The Amarillo High School office was not built for ceremony. The linoleum floors had lost their shine years ago, and the air smelled faintly of chalk and disinfectant. A flag hung limp in the corner, its colors fading under fluorescent light. But on that Friday morning, the quiet hallways hummed with an unusual energy. Teachers whispered near the water fountain. Students slowed as they passed the office windows, peering in with curiosity. For in the middle of the room stood a man who did not belong, Dr. Malcolm Kerr. He was tall, his gray suit pressed, his tie knotted in precise symmetry. He carried himself with the clipped economy of someone who lived by schedules and lecture halls. His shoes, polished leather, clicked against the worn tiles like a metronome. He looked around the office with polite disinterest, but his eyes, sharp, calculating, landed at last on a boy in a flannel shirt. Ethan Cole sat in a chair by the wall, boots still dusted from morning chores. He held his hat in his lap, fingers fidgeting at the brim. His father, John Cole, stood behind him, arms crossed, gaze steady but wary. Principal Harmon cleared his throat nervously. "Dr. Kerr, thank you for making the trip. This is Ethan, and this is his father, John." Kerr extended his hand. John shook it, firm but cautious. The professor's grip was strong, though his palm felt unused to farm work. "And you," Kerr said, turning to Ethan. "You are the boy who left the note." Ethan's eyes flicked up, uncertain. "Yes, sir." Kerr studied him for a long moment. "I would like to see how you think. Not tomorrow, not next year. Today." John shifted uncomfortably. "Hold on now. He's just a kid. 14 to... You flew all the way from Boston to drag him into something he barely understands?" Kerr's expression softened slightly, but only slightly. "Mr. Cole, I assure you, I am not here to drag anyone. I am here because your son may see what thousands of brilliant minds have missed. If that is true, it would be a disservice to leave him hidden in the dust of these fields." John's jaw tightened. He looked down at his son, who sat small and quiet in the chair. "Ethan, do you want this?" The boy hesitated. His mind flashed to the chalkboard, the way the numbers had felt alive. He swallowed. "I just want to learn, Dad." Silence hung. Then John nodded slowly. "All right. But don't forget where you're from, you hear me? Don't let them make you forget." Ethan's voice was soft but steady. "I won't." That afternoon, they drove Kerr to the Cole farm. Dust rose behind the Chevy as it rattled down the gravel road. Kerr sat in the passenger seat, his eyes scanning the endless flat horizon. "This land feels infinite," he murmured. John chuckled dryly. "Feels empty most days." Ethan, in the back seat, leaned forward. "But empty land still grows wheat, and grass for cattle." Kerr turned, studying him. "So you see possibility where others see nothing." The boy shrugged, embarrassed. At the farmhouse, they sat at a table scarred by years of meals and repairs. John poured coffee into chipped mugs. Kerr set his briefcase on the table, unlatched it, and pulled out a pad of paper. "Ethan," he said, sliding the pad forward, "show me how you see the problem." The boy picked up a pencil. His father watched closely, unsure whether to be proud or afraid. Ethan drew slowly. Not numbers first, but shapes. Curves that bent toward each other, arcs that twisted like braids of rope. "The primes," he said softly. "They don't sit alone. They pull. Like when sheep move through a gate. Each one looks random, but the herd flows in a pattern." Kerr leaned closer. His pulse quickened. He had heard countless metaphors, some foolish, some poetic. But this image, sheep through a gate, struck a chord. The distribution of primes had always seemed scattered, chaotic. Yet here was a boy likening it to something organic, something alive. "Do you know what the critical line is?" Kerr asked. Ethan shook his head. "It is where the heartbeat of this equation should fall," Kerr explained, voice low. "If every non-trivial solution touches that line, the Riemann hypothesis is true. If even one does not, the world of mathematics changes." He tapped the boy's sketch. "What you have drawn, it is not proof, but it is not nonsense either." John exhaled through his nose. "So what now? You want to take him away to Boston?" "Not take," Kerr corrected. "Invite. A visit, first. Let him sit in a classroom at Harvard. Let him stand at a chalkboard. Let him see if the language of numbers is truly his own. If it is not, he can come home to these fields, no harm done. If it is, then he will belong to both worlds." John looked at Ethan. "Son?" Ethan's throat was dry. He thought of the fields, the fences, the cattle. He thought of the chalkboard with its infinite river of fractions. His heart beat quick and uneven. "I'd like to see it," he whispered. 3 days later, father and son stepped off a plane into the sharp air of Cambridge, Massachusetts. The wind off the Charles River carried a chill unlike anything Amarillo had ever known. Ethan pulled his flannel tight around him, shivering, but his eyes widened at the sight of spires and red brick halls rising against the gray sky. John placed a rough hand on his shoulder. "Don't forget, son. These walls may be tall, but they're just walls. What matters is the ground you stand on." Ethan nodded. The boy from the farm had arrived at Harvard, not yet knowing that the trial awaiting him would be written in chalk. The wooden doors of Jefferson Hall creaked as Ethan pushed them open. Inside, rows of benches rose like waves, polished smooth by generations of students. Sunlight slanted through tall windows, lighting the chalk dust that floated in the air. The room smelled faintly of old paper, stone, and something more electric: anticipation. Dr. Kerr led the way down the aisle, his stride measured. Behind him, Ethan walked slowly, boots tapping against the worn floorboards. He kept his hat in his hands, twisting the brim nervously. John Cole trailed last, shoulders squared, his eyes taking in the vaulted ceiling as though it were another kind of barn, larger, grander, but still a shelter for labor. At the front, waiting with folded arms, stood Trevor Langford. A graduate student in his 20s, Trevor had the sharp cheekbones of someone who believed he was destined for more than the men around him. His tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled, and his smirk already in place. "So this is the farm boy," Trevor said, loud enough for the few gathered students to hear. A couple of them chuckled. "Harvard's great hope. Brought straight from the cattle yard to solve the mysteries of the universe." Kerr's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. He simply gestured to the chalkboard. "Ethan, take the board." The boy froze. He had expected questions, maybe gentle explanations. Not this. Not a public trial. Trevor picked up a piece of chalk and twirled it like a baton. "Don't worry," he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "We'll start simple. Show us why the sum of 1 over every whole number diverges. That's middle school math. Or are cows more your specialty?" The laughter stung. Ethan lowered his eyes. His father shifted in his seat, fists tightening. Kerr's voice cut sharp through the noise. "Let him work, in silence." Ethan stepped forward. His hand trembled as he took the chalk. The board loomed like a cliff. He drew slowly, 1 + 1/2 + 1/3 + 1/4, and so on. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper. If you group the terms, the sum never settles. 1/2 plus 1/3 is bigger than 1/2. Add a few more, it's bigger still. No matter how far you go, the pile keeps growing. Like stacking hay bales higher and higher. The barn can't hold them. The series blows past the roof. The room grew still. Trevor's smirk faltered. Fine. Any textbook has that. Try something harder. He scribbled furiously, covering half the board with tangled symbols, lines bending across one another. There. Show me the path to the critical line, if you even know what that means. Ethan stared. His chest tightened. These were not the gentle curves he had drawn in Amarillo. These were walls of symbols, cold and rigid. For a moment, he thought of turning away, of admitting he was only a boy. Then he remembered the sheep, the gate, the way numbers had flowed like water through his mind. He erased a section of Trevor's work. Gasps rose from the benches. No one erased a graduate student's chalk. But Ethan moved slowly, carefully, as though making room for something alive. He drew a curve, then another weaving through. His hand steadied. Primes aren't random fence posts, he said, voice stronger now. They're like sheep. Each looks separate, but they move together. When one passes through, another follows a rhythm. The critical line, it isn't a wall, it's the gate. They pass through it again and again, not perfectly, but enough to show the rhythm is real. The curves bent across the board, spiraling inward, then outward again. It was not a proof, but it breathed. The room was silent. Trevor broke it with a laugh, harsh, forced. Sheep and gates? That's your grand theory? You think poetry replaces mathematics? He turned to Kerr. This is a waste of time. Anyone can draw squiggles and talk about barns. But Kerr did not answer. He was staring at the board, lips pressed tight, eyes glinting. He saw what Trevor could not. A boy who had never read a journal article, never sat in a seminar, yet who touched the problem with instinct, with vision. Not proof, no, but not nonsense either. Let the mathematics answer, Kerr said finally, his voice low but firm. Trevor's jaw tightened. So you believe this child? Over years of rigorous training? I believe, Kerr said, that the field does not care for training or titles, only truth. And sometimes truth comes in rough hands. All eyes turned to Ethan, who still held the chalk. His hand was dusted white. He looked smaller than the board, smaller than the room, but in his eyes was a calm no insult could shake. John Cole stood slowly, breaking the silence. His voice carried the weight of the plains. My boy may not speak your language the way you like it, but when I watch him fix a fence, he sees the crack before it breaks. Maybe he's seeing the same in your numbers. No one laughed. Ethan set the chalk down gently. His father placed a hand on his shoulder, steady and proud. For the first time since he had entered Jefferson Hall, Ethan allowed himself a small breath of relief. He had stood at the board. He had not broken. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the Charles and lit the river in fire, Kerr sat in his office alone. On his desk lay Ethan's sketch from Amarillo. On his board now were the boy's curves, drawn with uncertain hands, but alive with possibility. He whispered the words again. Sheep through a gate. Outside, bells tolled the hour. A boy from a cattle farm had rattled Harvard's marble halls, and this was only the beginning. The long oak table gleamed beneath the hanging lamps. Around it sat half a dozen professors, their glasses glinting, their notebooks spread open like weapons. The room was smaller than Jefferson Hall, but heavier somehow, the air dense with the quiet authority of men and women who had spent lifetimes among equations. Dr. Malcolm Kerr stood at the head of the table. Beside him, nervous but steady, sat Ethan Cole. The boy wore the same flannel shirt he had brought from Amarillo, its sleeves rolled neatly. Dust still clung faintly to the seams, as though the Texas plains had followed him into Harvard. At the far side of the table sat Dr. Evelyn Bright. She was not tall, but her presence filled the room more than anyone else's. Her hair was silver, her eyes sharp, but not unkind. She chaired the Committee on Academic Integrity, and every student knew her as a figure both feared and respected. She had agreed to observe this gathering. In truth, her presence made it a trial. Kerr cleared his throat. Colleagues, thank you for coming. What you see before you is not an ordinary student, and certainly not an ordinary circumstance. Ethan Cole is 14. He comes from Amarillo, Texas. He has no training beyond the basics. Yet his vision of the prime numbers has unsettled me, and I believe it deserves our attention. A professor with a beard like winter frost leaned forward. We are to believe a farm boy has glimpsed what entire generations of mathematicians could not? Trevor Langford, seated smugly at the side, smirked. You should have seen him yesterday, drawing sheep at the board. It was quaint, charming even. But mathematics is not art class. Ethan's cheeks flushed, but he said nothing. Dr. Bright raised a hand, silencing the murmurs. Let us hear the boy, she said. Not second-hand reports. Ethan, can you explain to us what you see? Slowly, please. We are not here to trap you, but to understand. Ethan swallowed hard. The lamps buzzed faintly above him. He set his hands on the table to keep them from trembling. When I look at the primes, he began, voice soft, I don't see them scattered. I see them flowing, like sheep through a narrow gate. Each one seems separate, but together they make a rhythm. The equation they showed us, the Riemann zeta function, it looks like an endless fraction. But to me it feels like water narrowing into a stream. And the critical line everyone talks about, it feels like the fence line. The sheep don't always run perfectly straight, but they press toward that path again and again. He paused, unsure if his words made sense. The bearded professor frowned. That is metaphor, not mathematics. Perhaps, Bright said quietly. But metaphor is often how new mathematics begins. Kerr leaned forward. Colleagues, what he is saying is not proof. But his instinct, to treat the zeros not as points but as flows, is strikingly similar to approaches some of us have considered but never articulated so simply. I ask you to listen, not as gatekeepers, but as explorers. Trevor snorted. Explorers don't use nursery rhymes. He cannot survive in this field if all he brings are farmyard images. Ethan looked at him then, meeting his eyes for the first time. His voice, though quiet, carried steady. I'm not asking to survive your field. I'm just telling you what I see. The room fell silent. Dr. Bright studied the boy for a long moment. Then she asked, Ethan, when you see this flow, do you imagine it ends somewhere? Or does it continue forever? Ethan hesitated. It feels like a spiral, he said at last. It keeps circling, tighter, then wider again. Like the wind around the silo back home. You think it's the same gust, but it's part of something larger. Her lips pressed into a thin line, not disapproval, concentration. The bearded professor leaned back, folding his arms. Even if this boy has instincts, mathematics is not won by instinct. It is won by rigor. Can he write a single lemma, let alone a proof? Kerr answered before Ethan could. Rigor comes with training. Instinct does not. Instinct cannot be taught. Dr. Bright finally leaned forward, folding her hands. I have heard enough. Mr. Cole, you may have a gift, But Harvard is not only about seeing patterns. It is about surviving the weight of tradition, of scrutiny, of doubt. Some here will mock you, some will resist you. The test before you is not just the problem of primes, but the problem of belonging. Her gaze softened just slightly. Do you understand this? Ethan nodded slowly. Yes, ma'am. She tapped her pen lightly on the table. Then hear me clearly. The mathematics may whisper to you, but the world will shout over it. You will need more than vision. You will need patience, humility, and strength. The boy's voice steadied. I'll try. Kerr allowed himself a quiet smile. Trevor scowled, muttering under his breath, sheep and spirals, absurd. Bright's eyes flicked toward him, sharp as glass. Mr. Langford, you may leave. Trevor stiffened. But leave. He gathered his papers in silence, face burning, and left the room. The door clicked shut. The professors exchanged uneasy glances. None wished to oppose Bright when her tone carried that weight. She turned back to Ethan. You may stay, but remember, the challenge ahead of you is not only the mathematics, it is the law of the academy itself. Ethan lowered his gaze. He did not fully understand what she meant, but he felt the truth of it settle into his chest like a heavy stone. That evening, as they walked along the Charles, John Cole put a hand on his son's shoulder. The wind cut cold, carrying the smell of river water and brick. You did good today, John said. Held your own, but I could see it. They're circling, like coyotes. You need to know when to speak and when to hold back. Ethan nodded. He thought of Dr. Bright's words, the warning in them. Not just numbers, laws, rules, a game he had never played. He looked out across the river, its surface rippling with the last of the sun. Somewhere inside, the spirals kept turning, threading through the silence. The round table was over, but the trial had only begun. Snow drifted across the Charles River, settling on the stone bridges like powdered sugar. Cambridge moved briskly in the cold, students wrapped in scarves, professors hurrying across the yard. But inside Dr. Kerr's office, the air was warm, the radiators humming faintly. Ethan sat across from the professor, boots resting awkwardly on the polished floor. He wore the same flannel shirt, though his mother had pressed it before he left Amarillo. His father sat beside him, hat on his knee, gaze steady but cautious. On the desk between them lay a folder stamped with the crimson seal of Harvard. Kerr slid it across the wood with deliberate calm. This, Kerr said, is an invitation. Ethan, the faculty is offering you a place in our summer program. A scholarship to cover the cost, housing near the campus, and access to the mathematics laboratory. You would not simply visit. You would work, alongside graduate students and faculty, to see how far your vision can take you. The boy's eyes widened. His hands hovered over the folder but did not touch it. John cleared his throat. And what's the price? No price, Kerr replied. Only commitment. It will be difficult, demanding. But if Ethan chooses, he will have a place here. Silence hung heavy in the office. Snow tapped softly at the window. John looked at his son. What do you think, boy? Ethan opened the folder. Inside, official letters printed on fine paper, signatures in dark ink. The words blurred for a moment, not from confusion, but from the rush of something he had never felt before. Possibility. He swallowed. I want to try, Dad. That evening, back in the small guest house Harvard had arranged, John rummaged through the old duffel he had carried from Texas. He pulled out something wrapped in cloth and laid it on the table. Ethan watched curiously as his father unwrapped it, Inside lay a heavy wrench, its steel worn smooth with age, the handle engraved faintly with initials, H.C. Cole. "This belonged to your granddad," John said quietly. "He carried it through the Dust Bowl years, fixed tractors with it, patched pipes, kept this family alive when there wasn't a dime to spare. When he passed, he left it to me, and now I'm leaving it to you." Ethan lifted the wrench with both hands. It was cold, weighty, far heavier than he expected. "Why give it to me now?" he asked. John's voice was rough. "Because you're stepping into a world I don't understand. Out here, they'll measure you with tests, with rules, with words I can't even pronounce. But I want you to remember this wrench. It means you come from people who fixed what was broken with their hands. Don't carry it as a burden. Carry it as a memory." The boy's throat tightened. He held the wrench close, feeling its cold bite. "I won't forget." His father's eyes softened. "Good. Then go. Learn. But when you stand in those tall halls, remember the fences and fields that raised you." The next morning, Ethan walked across Harvard Yard with the wrench tucked carefully in his backpack. Snow crunched beneath his boots. Students hurried past in thick coats, coffee cups steaming in their hands. He felt out of place, but he also felt steady. Each step echoed his father's words. Memory, not burden. At the laboratory, Kerr welcomed him. Long blackboards lined the walls, filled with chalked equations. The air smelled of ink and dust. "This will be your place," Kerr said, gesturing to a small desk. "Room 214. Here you will think. Here you will struggle. And here, perhaps, you will discover." Ethan set his backpack down, resting the wrench inside the desk drawer. He ran his fingers across the wood, rough and scarred, not unlike the kitchen table back home. For hours he worked in silence. He wrote curves and threads, tried grouping primes as though they were strands weaving together. Sometimes the lines collapsed into nonsense, but sometimes, just sometimes, they hinted at a rhythm pulsing beneath. When his hand cramped, he paused and touched the wrench in the drawer. Its weight steadied him, as if his grandfather's calloused hand still guided his own. That evening, Dr. Bright appeared in the doorway. "You've settled in," she observed, her tone neither harsh nor kind, but precise. "Yes, ma'am," Ethan said quietly. She studied the board, covered in spirals and arcs. "You draw as though the numbers are alive." "They feel alive," Ethan replied. "Like cattle shifting in the pen. You can't predict each one, but you know the herd will press forward." Her silver brows lifted. "That is an image most mathematicians would dismiss. And yet, perhaps it is closer to truth than the abstractions we cling to." Ethan glanced down, shy. "It's just the only way I know how to see it." Bright nodded slowly. "Hold on to that. The Academy will try to polish you, to cut away the rough edges. Some of that you will need, but not all. Protect the part of you that sees differently. That is where your gift lives." She turned, her coat brushing the doorway. "And remember, every gift is also a responsibility. Use it well." Then she was gone, leaving only the echo of her footsteps in the hall. Late that night, Ethan sat alone in room 214. Snow swirled outside the tall windows, the lamps casting pale light on the chalkboard. He drew another curve, then another, until the lines tangled into something like a braid. He leaned back, exhausted but alive. The wrench lay in the drawer, heavy and silent. He whispered to himself, almost a prayer, "I'll remember." And for the first time since Amarillo, He felt both the weight of his past and the pull of his future, braided together like threads in the same rope. The first weeks of the Harvard summer program passed in a rhythm Ethan quickly learned. Mornings filled with quiet chalk work in room 214. Afternoons spent listening to lectures he barely understood. Evenings walking the Charles River with his father. But at night, in that small room with tall windows and wooden floors, Ethan's thoughts moved faster than the lectures. He began to sketch what he later called the thread matrix. It started simple, strands curving across the board, like wires twisting into a braid. Then he drew smaller strands weaving between them, pulsing with a rhythm he felt more than new. Each night, the board grew fuller, his hand moving until chalk dust clung to his sleeves and the air tasted faintly of lime. He was trying, in his own way, to hear the primes breathe. One evening, after Kerr had left and the hallways were quiet, Ethan stood alone in room 214. Snow no longer fell outside. Instead, summer dusk carried the smell of wet grass. He worked steadily, drawing, erasing, redrawing. Finally, near midnight, exhaustion pressed him into the wooden chair. He left his notes scattered on the desk, the chalk still broken in his hand. With a yawn, he packed his backpack and closed the door behind him. The next morning, he returned early. Sunlight slanted through the windows, painting the floorboards in gold. But the moment he stepped inside, his chest tightened. The board was clean, not just erased, scoured. Every spiral, every curve, every trace of his threadwork was gone. On the desk, the stack of his notes had vanished. Pages that had taken hours, days to build, gone. And on the chalkboard, across the wide, empty space, a single red slash had been drawn, long and diagonal, cutting the board like a wound. Beneath it, in letters carved with chalk so hard the slate had chipped, "Some threads unravel the whole system." Ethan froze. His breath came shallow. He stepped closer, running his fingers over the words. Chalk dust crumbled under his touch, but the mark remained, gouged deep. Someone had been here. Someone had seen his work and wanted him to stop. Later that morning, Kerr entered. His brow furrowed when he saw the board. "Who did this?" he demanded. "I don't know," Ethan said quietly. "My notes are gone." Kerr touched the red slash with his fingertips, then dropped his hand. "This is no prank. No student speaks in riddles like this. Someone wanted you to feel the weight of it." John arrived soon after, called by Kerr. He stared at the board, his jaw tight. "This looks like a threat." "It is a warning," Kerr said, "and a serious one." Ethan sat at the desk, silent. His mind spun not with fear, but with loss. Every line, every thread, every shape he had drawn, wiped away. He tried to summon them back, but memory flickered uncertainly, like fire in the wind. Then he remembered the wrench in his drawer. He pulled it out, the cold steel heavy in his hand. He set it on the desk. Its weight steadied him, as if anchoring his thoughts. "I can redraw it," he said softly. Kerr studied him. "Are you sure?" Ethan nodded. "If I could see it once, I can see it again. And maybe clearer this time." John placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "You don't have to fight shadows, boy. Not if it puts you in danger." But Ethan shook his head. "It's not about fighting. It's about listening again. If the pattern is there, it will come back." That evening, the three returned to room 214 together. Kerr locked the door behind them. Ethan picked up a fresh piece of chalk. The board loomed, clean except for the red scar left behind. Slowly he began again, curve by curve, thread by thread. His hand steadied as memory rose, not as exact replicas but as stronger, sharper shapes. He bent the strands inward, then outward, weaving them more tightly than before. The matrix took form again, alive beneath his hand. At last, he stepped back. The board glowed with white lines under the lamplight. The red slash still cut across it, but now it looked less like a wound and more like a barrier the threads pressed against. Kerr exhaled. Better than before. John's eyes softened with something between pride and fear. Ethan touched the wrench on the desk, then whispered, almost to himself, "They can erase it 100 times. I'll just keep drawing it." The room was silent, save for the faint hum of the radiator. For the first time, Ethan understood what Bright had warned him. The challenge was not only mathematics, it was resistance, from those who guarded the gates too fiercely. But the threads, once seen, could not be unseen. That night, walking back through the yard, Ethan felt the summer air thick with the scent of leaves. Students laughed in the distance, but he carried only the sound of chalk in his mind. The red slash haunted him. Who had drawn it? Why? Yet beneath the unease was a quiet certainty. Whatever force had tried to silence him had only sharpened his resolve. Threads unravel the system, the words had said. Perhaps. But some threads, Ethan thought, were meant to hold the whole together. The Science Center auditorium was never meant to feel like a theater. Yet tonight, it did. Rows of seats filled with students, professors, visitors from across campus. The lights dimmed until only the stage glowed beneath a single spotlight. At the back, Ethan Cole stood in line with other speakers. He clutched a few notes in his hand, though he already knew he would not use them. His palms sweated. His boots felt too heavy on the polished floor. The event was called Ignite Night. 5-minute talks, fast, sharp, ideas condensed like sparks. Each speaker had 20 slides, auto-advancing every 15 seconds. It was meant to thrill the crowd, to showcase clever minds. Ethan was the last slot, a mercy or a cruelty depending on how one saw it. "Next," called the organizer, a cheerful graduate student with a microphone clipped to her collar. "Please welcome Ethan Cole from Amarillo, Texas." There was polite applause. Some students leaned forward, curious. Others smirked, remembering rumors about the farm boy. Ethan stepped into the light. The stage stretched wide, the screen behind him a blank canvas waiting for his first slide. His throat tightened. For a heartbeat, he thought of turning, walking off. Then he remembered the red slash in room 214, the gouged words. Some threads unravel the whole system. He touched the small wrench in his pocket, his anchor. He took a breath. The first slide appeared, a plain spiral, white on black. Ethan's voice trembled at first, then steadied. Most people draw math like this. He sketched the air with his finger, tracing rigid lines. Straight, cold, symbols stacked like bricks. He paused. The second slide appeared, sheep moving through a wooden gate, dust rising around them. A few chuckles rippled in the crowd. "But what if we've drawn it wrong?" Ethan asked. "What if math is not walls and bricks, but herds and rivers? What if the prime numbers, those little seeds of arithmetic, are not scattered randomly, but flowing together like sheep through a gate?" The room stilled. Some leaned back, others leaned forward. Slide 3. A stream curving between rocks. Slide 4. Arcs of chalk, hand-drawn, threads weaving. Every prime seems lonely. 2, 3, 5, 7. They look like accidents, but step back and you hear a rhythm, like listening to breathing. You don't notice each inhale, but the pattern is there. His voice deepened, a calm he did not know he carried. Slide 5. A simple curve, pulsing like a heartbeat. This is what the Riemann hypothesis asks. Do all those hidden beats align along one line? If they do, we understand the secret music of numbers. If they don't, the music breaks. The crowd was silent. Even the students who had snickered now watched, their eyes caught by the boy's steady tone. Slide 6. His thread matrix, drawn in chalk but redone in clear white lines. Spirals, arcs, weaving together. I don't have the proof. Not yet. But I think maybe math isn't a fortress. Maybe it's a song. And sometimes, if you listen, you can hear it whisper. The last slide appeared. No numbers, no graphs, just a wide Texas field under an open sky. Ethan lowered his hands. The auto advance clicked to black. For a moment, there was no sound. Then applause rose, not polite this time, but real, rolling across the room. Professors clapped, students cheered, even a few whistles rang out. Dr. Kerr, seated near the front, felt something tighten in his chest. He had spent a lifetime among equations, pages of rigor and logic. But this boy, with dust still on his boots, had reminded the room why they had all begun the journey in the first place. Wonder. At the back, Dr. Evelyn Bright leaned forward, hands clasped. She did not clap loudly, but her eyes shone with quiet recognition. She had seen many prodigies. Few had spoken with such humility, such unguarded truth. When the applause softened, Bright rose and walked to the stage. She carried a small brass key in her palm. "Ethan," she said, her voice carrying clearly, "Room 214 has been troubled. From now on, it is yours. No locks, no interruptions. The work you do there belongs to you." She pressed the key into his hand. The metal was cool, solid. Ethan's throat tightened, words failing him. He only nodded. The audience erupted again, clapping louder than before. Later, outside the Science Center, the night air was cool, carrying the smell of wet leaves. Ethan stood with his father, the brass key heavy in his pocket. "You spoke like yourself, boy," John said. "Not like them, like yourself." Ethan smiled faintly. "I was scared." His father's hand rested on his shoulder. "Courage isn't about not being scared. It's about speaking anyway." They walked slowly toward the yard, the lamps glowing gold along the paths. Ethan glanced up at the tall brick walls, their windows lit against the dark. For the first time, he felt not only like a guest in this place, but like someone who had left a mark upon it. Room 214 waited, and the threads, once begun, would not stop weaving. Sanders Theater was built like a chapel. Its vaulted ceiling and stained glass windows gave the impression of solemn worship, though tonight the altar was mathematics. The great hall filled quickly, wooden seats creaking under the weight of professors, graduate students, even journalists who had caught wind of the farm boy at Harvard. The air buzzed with expectation. Some came to witness a miracle. Others came to see a child undone. At the center of the stage stood a lectern, and behind it, a blackboard that stretched wide. A projector glowed faintly, waiting for the first slide. Ethan Cole sat on a wooden chair to the side, hands folded, boots planted firmly on the floor. His father sat behind him, hat resting in his lap, jaw tight. Dr. Kerr stood near the front row, his face unreadable. And presiding over the gathering, seated with papers spread before her, was Dr. Evelyn Bright. Her silver hair caught the light like a crown. She had not called it a trial, but everyone knew the truth. Tonight was judgment. The first to speak was Professor Halverson, a senior scholar with a voice like gravel. "Colleagues, we gather to examine the so-called thread matrix proposed by this boy, Ethan Cole. We are told it hints at a new vision for the Riemann hypothesis. But let us be clear. Mathematics bows to no vision. It bows only to proof, and proof is what we demand. He gestured sharply. Let the boy present. Ethan rose slowly. He walked to the board, each step heavy with the weight of hundreds of eyes. Chalk dust already coated the tray, waiting for his hand. He began simply, sketching arcs and spirals. This is how I see the primes. Not scattered, but flowing. Each one like a sheep through a gate. Alone, but part of a rhythm. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Some smiled at the image. Others scoffed openly. A professor from the back stood. Mr. Cole, metaphors are for poets. Where are your lemmas? Your theorems? Ethan paused. He looked at the chalk in his hand, then at the curves on the board. His voice stayed calm. I don't have lemmas yet. I have what I see. If you want walls, you can build them. But walls won't show you the rhythm. You have to listen. Laughter rose from a corner of the hall. Trevor Langford leaned forward, voice dripping with disdain. This is childish. He erases my work, draws farmyard spirals, and you call it insight? He has nothing but stories. Kerr stood abruptly. Enough. His voice echoed against the high arches. What this boy sees, you dismiss because it does not fit your mold. But I ask, what mold held Riemann when he first dreamed this equation? None. He saw, then he searched. That is how discovery begins. The hall quieted. Dr. Bright lifted a hand. Continue, Ethan, but know this. Tonight is not a sermon. You must convince not only with pictures, but with reason. Ethan nodded. He turned back to the board. His fingers tightened around the chalk. He drew a long line down the center. This is the critical line. Mathematicians have searched for 100 years to prove whether all the hidden beats fall here. Some say yes, some say no. But what if the question is wrong? The hall shifted uneasily. Ethan's voice steadied, low and clear. Maybe the primes don't march to a line like soldiers. Maybe they breathe around it, like lungs. Inhale, exhale, always returning, never fixed, but never gone. That is why the spirals matter. They are not accidents. They are the sound of the herd pressing through the gate again and again. For a moment, silence. The stained glass caught the last of the evening sun, throwing colored light across the stage. Then voices rose, challenges, scoffs, demands. Where is your equation? You speak of breath, but breath does not prove. Is this philosophy or mathematics? The noise swelled until it felt like a storm. Ethan stood small against it, chalk trembling in his hand. Then his father's voice cut through, steady as a Texas horizon. Let him finish. The hall hushed. Ethan looked out at the sea of faces, their eyes hard, waiting for him to falter. He felt the wrench in his pocket, heavy and cold. He thought of fences, of broken gates, of long nights under open sky. His voice rose, stronger than before. I am not here to ask for your approval. I am not here to fit your walls. I am here to tell you what the mathematics has whispered to me, that behind the noise there is rhythm, behind the scatter there is song. I cannot prove it tonight. But the truth does not need permission. It only needs to be spoken. The words hung in the vaulted hall like a bell tolling. For a long moment, no one moved. Then slowly the sound of clapping began. Not from Trevor, not from Halverson, but from Kerr. His hands struck together firmly, breaking the silence. Others joined. Students first, then some professors, then the entire hall erupted. The applause rolled up into the rafters, shaking the stained glass. Trevor sat stiff, jaw tight, refusing to clap. Halverson tapped his papers angrily against the desk. But Bright watched Ethan with eyes unreadable. When at last the noise softened, she rose. "Ethan Cole," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "You have not given us proof, but you have given us vision. And sometimes vision is what calls proof into being." She paused, then added, "Guard this gift. It will not be easy, but tonight you have spoken with clarity. And clarity is the beginning of truth." The hall erupted once more. Ethan stepped back from the board, his heart racing, his hands trembling. He had not won them all, but he had stood. And that, tonight, was enough. Later, walking out of Sanders Theater, John clapped his son on the back. "You held your ground, boy, like a post in the wind. That's all a man can do." Ethan looked up at the night sky above Cambridge, the stars faint against the city lights. The whispers of numbers still hummed in his mind, threads weaving through the silence. The reckoning was over, but the work, the real work, had only just begun. The door to room 214 was locked. Ethan stood in the hallway, staring at the brass knob. A sign hung crookedly, "Access suspended until further notice." No explanation, no signature, just silence. For weeks, whispers had followed him across the yard. Professors debated in hushed tones. Some wanted to nurture his work, others to bury it until rigor caught up. And then, one morning, the key in his pocket no longer turned. Dr. Kerr stormed through the corridors, demanding answers, but none were given. Dr. Bright's expression revealed nothing, and Trevor, always near the shadows, smirked like someone who had waited for this ending all along. But Ethan did not pound on the door. He did not shout. He only stood quietly, palm against the wood, as if listening one last time. Then he turned away. That afternoon, under the wide grass of Harvard Yard, Ethan dragged a box of chalk across the lawn. A few curious students gathered. He knelt, drew the first spiral, then another, white lines twisting over green. "This is room 215, he said simply. More students joined, kneeling beside him. They sketched threads, arcs, matrices, until the grass bloomed with chalked spirals, like constellations pulled down to earth. Some laughed, some worked solemnly, but the lines grew. John Cole watched from a bench, arms crossed, pride swelling quietly in his chest. His boy was not locked out. He was opening doors others had never seen. By dusk, the yard glowed with patterns. Students stood around the drawings, snapping photos, whispering. One graduate student streamed the scene live. Within hours, it spread across the internet. Farm boy draws a new room at Harvard. The locked door of room 214 no longer mattered. Months later, a slim manuscript appeared online. Recursive structures and the matrix of thought. It was not a formal proof. It did not claim victory over the Riemann hypothesis. But it spoke in clear lines and quiet metaphors, weaving math with breath, primes with herds, infinity with threads. People downloaded it across the world. Some dismissed it. Others found themselves strangely moved. A mathematician in Berlin wrote, "Not a proof, but the first time in years I remembered why I loved this problem." A physicist in Tokyo called it an invitation. A retired farmer in Iowa printed it and placed it by his chair, whispering, "I can almost see it." And in Cambridge, Harvard quietly opened a new initiative, the Center for Systemic Thought. It was not named for Ethan, but everyone knew who had sparked it. Room 214 was unlocked, its chalkboards scrubbed clean, ready for anyone who wished to listen to the numbers again. Above the door, someone carved a simple phrase: "Genius isn't how loud you speak. It's how clearly you help others think." But Ethan was no longer there. He had returned to Amarillo, stepping once more into the wide fields and fences of home. The wrench still lay in his backpack, heavy with memory. His father greeted him with a clap on the back, no words needed. The cows still bellowed, the fences still sagged, the dust still rose. Nothing had changed, yet everything had. In a shed beside the farmhouse, Ethan cleared a space. He set up a chalkboard, salvaged from the school. A few neighbors' kids gathered, curious. He showed them simple patterns: multiplication tables, spirals drawn in chalk, sheep through a gate. Their eyes widened. They laughed, asked questions, argued. For the first time, Ethan felt not only like a learner, but like a giver. Word spread. More children came. Some evenings, even tired ranch hands stopped by, curious to hear how numbers could breathe. Ethan never lectured. He only invited them to see. The shed became a classroom, then a gathering place, then something more. Years later, when asked why he left Harvard's marble halls, Ethan would smile faintly. "Because truth doesn't live in one room," he would say. "It loops back, always, to where you began." And in the quiet evenings of Amarillo, as the sun sank red over the plains, the boy who once stood trembling at a chalkboard in Jefferson Hall would watch children draw spirals in the dirt with sticks, laughing as the wind carried dust across the fields. The threads kept weaving, and the loop was complete. Thank you for staying with me through this story. The story of a farm boy who dared to touch the unreachable equation. If, even for a moment, it warmed your heart, if it brought back the memory of your own curiosity, your own youth, then I ask one small favor: please subscribe. Not for numbers, not for fame, but so we can keep this fire burning, this hearth where stories heal, where knowledge is shared, and where no one is ever too old to dream again. Each time you press that button, it is like placing one more log on the fire, so it can burn longer, warmer for all of us.